this is gonna be a little bit more of a teaching moment about design thinking, and there's gonna be a lot of interactivity, so be ready. A little history of design thinking. Is there, yeah? Thank you. So design thinking started about 40 years ago. I researched this week, and it's a little hard to tell where it started. There's about 27,000 people who take credit for for being the founder, but it made its home here first at Stanford, at the D School, and David Kelly is widely credited with creating a program around design thinking. You can now major in design thinking at a lot of universities. Brad, I don't know if there's a major is there at Marshall?
Every freshman takes a design thinking.
Oh, how awesome is that? Wow, every freshman, Brad said, takes a class. That's really cool. So that's how important it is in today's world, in today's marketplace. The design school, or design thinking you can think of as a playbook for creativity, where you can create out-of-the-box thinking. If you think of products, you often think of what's feasible, what is technically feasible. And then you think maybe about what is viable from a business standpoint. But what a lot of people forget is what is desirable from a human standpoint. And that is where design thinking has really evolved in everything that Ron described. He talked about his customer and what does the customer want. And if you can get to the middle of that Venn diagram, that is where the magic happens. Probably a lot of you can think of a product that just doesn't feel like it was ever tested on a human. I have a new car, and every time I get in it, I think, did anyone ever open this door carrying a baby or groceries? Because it just physically does not work. So the whole idea of design thinking is to make sure there's a human-centered component to it. And the first step, as Ron said, is to define the problem. Problems are usually best defined not as can we, because what happens when I ask a can we question? What do I get? No. Yeah, yes or no. Yeah. When you turn that into how might we, you get a very different answer. What question did Ron ask? Does anyone remember? Just toss it out if you can think of it.
How might we make somebody's life better?
Yes, that absolutely. Was there another question he was answering when he started designing the stores?
How do we capture the other 95%?
Exactly, right? That's your question? Yeah, how do we do it? How do we get 95% of the people to come shop at our stores? The next thing he did was to empathize with the customer. What did he do to empathize with the customer? How did he get into their social, emotional, physical heads? One more time. Focus groups. We had a lot of time together. I remember during that time when he was always talking about what the customer would want. We'd sit at lunch. He goes, I think the customer wants water when they come in. We're going to give out water bottles. I don't know if that made it to the final cut, but always thinking about it from a customer standpoint. What does the customer need? What was the next thing he did? Ideate. Thank you. Now, it's a fancy word for brainstorming. And if you were here last year when Jeremy Utley, who teaches at the D School, talked about design thinking, he said to get to one killer idea, you don't need to think of that killer idea. You need what?
More shots on goal.
What's that?
Just like more ideas.
More shots on goal. Exactly. I think he said you need 1,000 mediocre to lousy ideas, because that is going to be how you drive to that big idea. What was the fourth thing he did? Prototype. That's right. And what did he prototype? Where did he prototype? Yeah, he started with one store, right? And it was limited because they didn't want a lot of people in. And then he rolled out his prototype to 25 stores. And then the final thing was test. Yeah, he tested. And the interesting thing about design thinking, it is an iterative, nonlinear process. So some people start with the empathy part. They say, you know what? I have this idea. I'm going to see if people really want this idea. And then they go through and define the problem. But it goes around and around. And Ron, throughout his 10 years at Apple, I know, tested, designed, prototyped over and over and over. And if you go in a store today, it was kind of fun to see the store in 2011 because it looks very different today. The people who've taken over after Ron have put their own stamp on it and done new design. So there's 5 principles that are important when you think about design thinking, because in about 10 minutes, or no, 15 minutes, you are all going to go out and be design thinkers yourselves. So I want you to keep in mind these 5 principles. One is around the idea of growth mindset, and we're not going to go into what growth mindset is. It was a body of work founded by Carol Dweck here at Stanford. If you haven't heard of it, it's worth researching. It's a wonderful thing to think about. But there was one key thing about growth mindset, and it's how you view failure. And the belief is that if you have learned something from your failure, you have not failed. And I love this quote from Edison, I have not failed, I just found 10,000 ways that don't work. So you really have to be willing in this process to take risks and make mistakes and learn from them. The second pillar is around language. And how many of you have been in no but meetings? Oh, come on, more of you have. I think we all have. They are killer. You know, no, but we tried that before, it didn't work. No, but we don't have the budget for that. No, but we don't have the time. No, but we don't have the resources. No, but that doesn't make any sense, right? At the end of that meeting, no one wants to suggest any good ideas. So what they do in improv, if any of you have done improv, is there is a tenet around yes and. And I often run yes and meetings, and I say it up front. And sometimes we've had mini marshmallows in the meetings, and you can toss them at anyone who says no but, because it just kills the meeting. So we are going to practice this because this is so important. It's important for today as you're going to go out and do this. It is important as you move on in life, in whatever you do. If you want to be a positive leader in your group, in your team, in your organization, think about using positive language and yes and. So I want everyone to stand up. And I need the name of a household object. Okay, one more. That was good.
Couch.
Okay, couch, let's go couch. Sorry, Blake. Okay, couch. So here's what you're gonna do. You are gonna have 3 minutes to design the coolest couch ever. In 3 minutes, you are gonna come up with your feature set of your couch. You're gonna name your couch, and you're going to develop a tagline, okay? So turn to 5 people around you, some little group of 5, 6, 4, it doesn't matter. And the only rule is you have to start every line with yes and, okay? Go. You got something? Okay. Okay, raise your hand if you have the winning idea for a new oh, of course. Okay, we need to hear 2 or 3. Let's start here. Stand up. I want to hear your couch name, the feature set, and a tagline. Oh, we need a fit mic.
Hello.
And your name.
So my name is Tristan Reeves. I'm from University of Central Florida. So our product is called the Lofa. It is a lounging sofa. It's made of satin. It can seat 4. The name is Lofa. It can recline. It has portable chargers in it. It has an attachable ottoman to any part of where you are sitting. It's ergonomic for your back. There's storage compartments for it. There's a massage setting. It has cup holders that are refrigerated to keep your beverage cold or hot. It has surround sound speakers in it. There's a TV attachment, much like how these chairs have a thing that comes out with your foot to write on, but a TV. It is portable, so you can take it with you wherever you go. Just put it in your suitcase. It is washing machine friendly. You can change the color of it, like the covers of it, the material, you can wash it, and then you can change the colors of it. Super comfy, and it is biodegradable, so when you move and you no longer need it, you just put it outside and then it disintegrates. You don't got to worry about getting rid of it. We are seeking investors.
Okay, is there a team that can beat this? Let's see how many hands go up now. Okay, we got one in the back. We'll do one more.
Thanks, sir. Hey, I am Graham Lemond from Sanford University, and our lovely couch is called the Graham. They named that, right? So not egotistical up here, but it's sleek, it's durable, it's buff, it's bold, and our tagline is take a beat. Right, so take a pause after a tough, long day. And Graham is great response after management. Because we're all managers here, we're managing people. What better way to come to the Graham, take a beat, great response after management. So our couch is tall enough for all of us lumbering athletes, has heating and cooling, right? Because who doesn't need that? It's easy to clean, you don't even have to clean it, it cleans itself. When you sit down, you don't have to worry about where did I place my keys, phone charger, stores everything, charges everything. Heck, it watches TV for you. You don't have to worry about multitasking, texting on your phone, and trying to keep up with the news because it texts for you. So, the Graham, seeking investors, sign up. See me back up here. Got a great team. Here we are. Thank you.
What was that process like? Fun? What else? Collaborative. What else?
Yes, and.
Yes, and. Yeah, right. That was the only rule, by the way, right? What else? Quick? Yeah, you did a lot in a very short period of time. That was 3 minutes. Creative. Positive. Energy. Yeah. One simple instruction, and look at the generative ideas that came out of this room. So that is what we want you to bring into your exercise in just a few minutes. So that's the second principle. The third is this notion of radical collaboration. And what it really means is the best ideas are not going to come out of an echo chamber. If you're sitting around a bunch of people with a bunch of nodding heads, you're probably not getting the best ideas. And at the D school, and I'm sure at every school that offers this program, they very intentionally take people from different backgrounds, different disciplines. They'll marry a medical student with someone from School of Philosophy, and bring people together to bring unique perspectives to the table. When you're in your groups today, we want to be very intentional about mixing you up. We don't want all players in one group. I know a lot of you are players, but we'd like players and fans and spouses and moms and dads and maybe coaches. There's a lot of hats we wear, so be thinking about all those different perspectives. Fourth is a bias to action. There's not a lot of analysis paralysis in what Ron described. And when you're doing things, there's something called rapid prototyping, where just build it, try it, test it. And the prototype that you are going to do today is a 90-second pitch. That's going to be your prototype that we're going to test with the esteemed panel. And then the last one is around constraints. And sometimes we think if we only had more time, more money, more people, more resources, we could really tackle this. But the inverse is true in design thinking. It's actually true that the less time you have, sometimes the less money you have, you actually get more creative. Think about that 2-minute warning in the game, right? That's when the action kicks in, the inspiration, the innovation. Sometimes it gets your juices flowing, right? So that's what we're going to do in this constrained time element. Unless you think that an hour is not nearly long enough, I, just for fun, created my own top 10 list of 10 incredible innovations that happened during the pandemic. Many within days, weeks, and months. So I'm going to go through my personal 10 list. First is Zoom. I know some of you may have been on Zoom before March of 2020. Our company had a subscription to Zoom, but we never used it because it was too hard. And within a week of the pandemic, our team was running webinars teaching people how to use Zoom because we had to. Number 9, all that PPE wear, those very stylish masks we all wore. There was a proliferation of those in weeks. Payments went contactless very quickly. Medical appointments went online, spawning a whole industry of telehealth. Graduations were reimagined. We were able to go to concerts and weddings and funerals and sports games without leaving our sofa. Too bad we didn't have our new sofa. That would have been really nice. Our fitness trainers taught us how to work out in whole new ways. A whole line of health apps developed to deal with our mental health. We have new fumigation and air purifying equipment that was spawned. One of our favorites, I'm sure, the drive-through brain prick to see if we had COVID. Probably one of the most amazing was a vaccine that typically takes 5 to 10 years, was ready within a year, nothing short of a scientific miracle. And then the number one that still shocks me to this day is that the entire world went to online learning within a week. If you had told schools in advance they have to do that, it never would have happened. But that constraint of time, that need to do it, was the inspiration. So that is what you are going to do next. Mark is going to come out and give you your specific mission.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
I have that. Which one is it?
The big green one, yeah.
Okay. Could I get my 4 team leaders to come up here and join? Just what we're going to do now is break into groups, and it's roughly going to break into even numbered groups. So what I'm going to have is the first 2 rows here, join the group on the right over there. The 3rd row, join the group on the left. Everyone else in the middle is going to be a separate group. And everyone in the back, you laggards, you guys who are sleeping back there, are going to be a separate group. Hope you can stay awake back there. So Mike Moe is, leans a little bit right of center, so he's going to take the guys on the right. They're the team gopher. So the Gophers are going to be over here on the right to get drafted.
Extreme right.
So we got the Bulldogs here, Georgia Bulldogs.
Back-to-back national champions.
Back-to-back next. They're talking smack already. So we got the Bulldogs. They're going to take the team on the left. Okay. What's in the middle of the country? What state's in the middle of the country?
Iowa.
We have the Cyclones. The Iowa State Cyclones are going to take the middle section past row 3. All right. Who's the last group here? Joey Grant. It's going to be the Knights. He's got the guys in the back. You may have to get some Red Bull or something, 24-hour energy to wake those guys up, because I saw a few dozing off there. So I don't know if your team's going to be up for it, but you got to fire the... They're resting. Okay. So the idea is kind of reimagine college football. And we're going to really have you break into these groups, and you're going to have 1 hour. And they are going to set up sort of the teams. And we're going to look at 3 issues. One issue is the NIL, okay? The second issue is the transfer portal. And then the third issue is think of athletes as employees of the university. So these are going to be the 3 issues. I believe it's like page 45 in your materials, something like 44 and 45. Have a list of ideas and concepts that you and your team can refer to. But these gentlemen, and it's going to be a fierce competition, trust me. These gentlemen are going to all take you on a journey of design thinking. They're going to organize you in certain ways. And as a result of that, your team, Mike's team, for example, is going to center around what's one idea for NIL that we're going to present for 90 seconds to a panel of experts who will join us in an hour or so. And they have a chance to then ask questions for like 3.5 minutes of your idea. So think of it as a Shark Tank model where you can present your idea. And trust me, there are no bad ideas. It's more of a positive. It's experience. Remember, you asked us to have you work together in groups, get to know each other, ideate, think about issues and problems. I can't think of anything more interesting today than the problems of college football, because they're sort of going topsy-turvy, and there's some things that we could really generate great ideas and share those back with the powers that be. So we're going to get together at 3:45, a little over an hour, and we're going to meet now. The teams can break out independent. I mean, the people in the back, you can go to whatever space you want to work with, but then we'll try and be back in here at 3:45.
Gophers, we're going to be outside. Let's go.
Yeah.
Cyclones in the cafeteria area, the lunchroom.
Okay.
Back-to-back national champs, of which we're going to win. We can stay in here if everybody's hanging out. Is that cool? Awesome.
Okay, we are about ready to get started. Just to review the ground rules again, each team's going to have 90 seconds to present their first idea, which will be around NIL, and then we'll go through the 4 teams. Then we'll bring up the second issue, which is the transfer portal, then the third issue. Ivan Meisel, whom many of you may not have met this year, but was here last year, is like the phenomenal legendary sports writer in college football, and he's going to be pleased and help moderate the discussion amongst our panel of experts. I think you've met the other experts already today. There's an official timekeeper, Nico. So, Nico, let me tell you something. Nico's got a bell, and if anybody goes over the bell, he's on the wrestling team. He's been telling me he wants to try this special maneuver, the Mongolian reversal. So anybody who's goes beyond the bell, you better be prepared for the Mongolian reversal. So let me turn it over to Ivan. Will call up the first team in their NIL.
Thank you, Mark. And you read that legendary, phenomenal stuff just like I wrote it out for you. So we're going to call this in honor of Bill McRaven's Shark Tank. So if you don't like Texas, that'll give you an incentive to do really well. But our first up, the Minnesota Gophers, Mike Moe's squad. Let's hear it.
Hello, hello. All right. Hi, everybody. My name's Sterling Strother. Go Gophers. All right. Thank you all for being here today. I'm here to address 2 primary problems in the NIL space. One, lack of donor regulation, and 2, lack of equitable redistribution of monies donated to individuals and organizations. We propose a third-party regulatory body associated with the NCAA that situates individual NIL reps at each school that monitor the registration of entities who would like to donate and the money that comes with donations. So if Coca-Cola wants to cut a deal sponsoring an individual player, donating to an individual player, they register with the rep, that registers back with the governing body. And then we also propose that when an external entity makes a donation, a certain amount of that, a certain percentage of that money is allocated to an all-athlete fund or an all-sport fund to ensure a universal basic income for all athletes at their individual schools, while assuring that individuals who are generating a disproportionate amount of revenue can still reap the benefits of their skills and talents. Groups, as I said, will still be able to dictate where the money goes, but that basic universal income tax ensures that all athletes are able to live well and train well and perform well and be student athletes. We also propose a cap on collective donations to ensure that talent and power is not concentrated in the hands of the few and that there can be parity throughout the NCAA. Thank you very much. Okay.
Tell you, hats off to the Gophers. Pretty impressive stuff. I love the equitable piece of this. I also love the independent oversight. Did you all talk about what the qualifications for that independent third-party body would be, or who would select it?
We didn't talk about who would select it. We agreed that there would need to be initial governance established by the NCAA, but that it shouldn't be controlled entirely by the NCAA to remain neutral in disputes.
Thank you.
Who pays the individual NIL reps on each campus?
The individual NIL reps will be paid by the third-party institution. We believe that initial funding for that institution should come from the NCAA and from individual conferences.
What about the smaller schools? You talked about the cap for the bigger schools. What about schools that aren't even able to reach, let's say, a minimum threshold? Wouldn't that present a disadvantage to those schools?
Yeah, so to be completely honest, we haven't walked all the way through how we're going to ensure that that happens. My off-the-rip idea is that in all likelihood, there will be a desire to donate past the kind of prescribed cap at the bigger schools, and I think that there can be a pretty intensive tax at the top level that then funds a basic minimum at schools that aren't able to get over that threshold on their own in donations.
Very interesting.
And this would be the tax that goes into kind of a common pot of money here. This goes for all athletes and all D1, D2, D3, wherever you're getting NIL. So this is the swim team, the cricket team, the whatever. They all get a portion of this as a result of the common money going into the common pot.
Yes, it would go to all athletes in all sports, and I think that the best reallocation, the best baseline for reallocation would depend on calculated cost of living and expenses in your given
in your area.
locale.
Yeah, great.
That's great.
So one of the things that we ask that we're looking at the foundation is, and we are doing this with people in Congress, how do you regulate agents? Did you talk about that? Because that is, right now, is a lethal aspect of all of this.
So we identified that it's an issue that there are individuals who aren't registered that are representing players at the collegiate level. We also know that there's another conversation that's going to happen as to whether athletes should be employees or not. The knee-jerk response is that there should be an established set of qualifications that's agreed upon by the NCAA and the third-party governing body, where you register or re-register yourself as one who can represent college athletes. But I think it's probably best to wait for our discussion with the employment or not employment group before we move forward.
Yeah, good. Good.
Wise.
Great job.
Good ideas. Yeah. Did I miss the bell ring? Was that 3.5 minutes?
Mike, I think you stacked the deck, buddy.
Oh, short. Okay. Did I? Okay, all right. Thank you, Sterling, and thank you to the Gophers. Next up, the Georgia Bulldogs and Drew Butler's crew.
What's up, guys? My name is Dustin DeLuey from University of Montana. Thanks for having me. This has been an awesome time, and this is groundbreaking stuff we're doing, and I'm just honored to be here. So, can I just jump right into it? We good? All right. Quick story. I'm playing at University of Montana. I'm a freshman in the dorms. My buddy Ryan Wells from Hamilton, Montana, drives a Volkswagen Bug. It's green. Coca-Cola sends him an email, say, hey, we'll give you $500 if you wrap your Bug with a Coca-Cola logo. He does it, gets $500. 2 weeks later, we're at practice. Somebody comes out, Ryan Wells, you're out. He gets pulled out of practice and he can't play in the game that week. We were freshmen, he probably wasn't gonna play anyways, so it didn't matter. Wasn't anything to do with football, but the NCAA had a regulation on him that he couldn't take home the amount of money, $500, that any other college student could have gotten. And so there's a problem here that we need to fix, and it's not just about the big money, it's not just about the guys on top that are doing promotions and have this opportunity, it's also for the guys that come from a home where they need to work a side job. You know, like there's plenty of us that in high school, we worked a job and played sports because we had to help mom and dad, you know, put food on the table. And so I want you guys to keep that in mind when you're making these things up. It's not just about that top level, it's about making it fair for the student athlete to do everything else that sometimes just the regular students get to do. Does that make sense? So with that said, we talked in the Georgia Bulldog. Yeah. All right. We need a third-party ruling committee, first of all. Third-party ruling committee, okay? And this third-party ruling committee can be much like the college football playoff committee. It's people from all different walks of life. That's all right. You were stimulated. Ask some questions and we'll get to my stuff through your questions, please. It's all gonna come out.
So Dustin, I'll give you a little phone a friend.
We'll get there.
What's the one single biggest differentiator from what you heard from the Gophers that you think would really make your idea more compelling?
That the NCAA should not be that ruling committee. That the NCAA maybe they can police it, but the NCAA has gotten away with a lot of things for a lot of years, and I think they got a bad reputation right now in the eyes of a lot of fans and a lot of college football players. And so I do not believe the NCAA should be the ones coming up with these standardized rules that need to be set over the next couple of years.
And so who is the ruling committee then if it's not
Great
NCAA?
question. I'm glad you brought that up. I give the example of the college football playoff committee. People from all different aspects of the world. You know, we have business leaders, we have government officials, we have some lawyers, we also have some average everyday fans. It's a collective group that can be voted on, and it can be revolving. It can change every year based on people's schedules and whether they're interested or not. But they got to be willing to give, say, every quarter they got to meet for a weekend, and they got to continue to evolve these standards. It's not going to be done one year and we just stamp it and let it go through. It's got to evolve, and I think the people should be from all walks of life.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What are the standards?
That's for them to figure out, and it's going to take years, honestly, and I think it'll change, just like our economy changed, and just like our the way it all changes. But I do think to come up with a contract. Yeah, fair. Hey, 90 seconds is not enough time to do this. I love it. Any other questions? Please. We got all day. I'm not going home until Sunday.
With NIL, of course, to the average fan, I think some of the concern is Coca-Cola, somebody big, or just a big donor, an anonymous big donor says, yeah, I'm going to pay you a lot of money.
but guess what? I'm paying Vegas more. And now I need you not to make that pass. Now I need you. How do you police that with that amount of money?
Good question. And I think I understand your question. That, I believe we can leave up to the universities and their compliance officers.
Okay.
And that part of that third-party committee, our idea, the Bulldogs here, was that part of those meetings you'd bring in, you'd have to have an employee that is represented by the university, not paid with the NIL money, paid out of his university salary, and he attends these meetings, and they are required to understand the rules, understand the changes in the rules, and then come back to their university and educate not only the coaches, but the players. We talked about every freshman that attends a university, whether it's women's soccer or men's football, has to take a course like that first semester that educates them on financial independence, tax liability, whether they're going to get an NIL or not, but it just prepares them in case they do. And that's part of the new requirements that are all part of this third-party committee and how that gets pushed down throughout the markets. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you.
Good job, buddy. Good job.
This is awesome. Thank you.
Nicely done. You hung in there well.
That's all right.
That's fun.
That was a tough one.
Better to play well in the fourth quarter. Strong finish there by Dustin. All right, Iowa State Cyclones, you're up.
Woo! Good afternoon. I'm Jake Crissup, representing Northern Arizona University, fellow Big Skyer, but I'm not going to tell the stories that Dustin told. He's a Grizz. I'm going to let him be a Grizz. But I have a 5-point plan for NIL reform that the Iowa State Cyclones have come up with. First, we would create a new governing body that would be appointed by athletic directors and presidents across the United States. Second, we would have a centralized portal for all NIL deals that would allow a level of transparency that's not currently available. Third, we would tier by existing divisions that are already recognized by the NCAA. So Division III, Division II, the FCS, Division I, what was formerly 1AA, and then the Bowl Division. And we would, as part of the tiering, we would have a cap for incoming freshmen for each of the divisional tiers, so that we would get out of this arms race war with these high school seniors who are too young to really understand this. Now, once they get out of their freshman year, the cap goes away and they can have earned it, so to speak, at the college level. Fourth, there would be incentives for player retention to try to reduce the transfer portal. And first and foremost, we would be looking to institute a graduation bonus if you graduate from the institution that you enter into as a freshman. And fifth, we would institute negative consequences for any excessive transfer portal, meaning, there's already an eligibility restriction after your second transfer. We would cap and maybe even exclude any sort of pay after the first transfer. So if you aren't happy in your first school, you get a big payday on your second school. Your third school, you're not going to get that payday. So you can't just sit there and keep timing out. So anyway.
Great job getting all 5 points of your plan in. The question that leaps out to me is, how do you get an antitrust exemption for capping payment to high school kids coming in?
We had a tax specialist on our board, and so we talked about that a lot. And I'm going to defer that probably to the later discussion on the whether you're an employee or not. But that's why we limited it to the freshman class and it was acknowledging the fact that none of these kids have stepped foot on a college campus or on a college field, and so there's no way to know if that kid is really going to pan out because the level of talent that he's playing against is different than a level of playing at a college level.
How do you account for a company that understands your cap, but says, hey, I'll pay you in the second year, not necessarily under the table, but they'll say, hey, I'll pay you year 2 or year 3, just promote my brand.
I think that's a great point, Sam. And I think that rolls into the incentives for player retention. And that would be encouraged. You would want to say, hey, if you stick around at University of Texas, we would love that. And this is what years 2, 3, and 4 are going to look like. But year 1, this is it. This is your cap.
What if that player shines? Let's say that player is a star in year 1. We've seen a lot of freshman phenoms, people who leave after 2 years. They redshirt 1 year, then they leave after 2 years, right? 2 years playing. What do you say to a player like that?
As far as how the freshman cap would affect him?
Correct.
I think you're going to see your payday in year 2. And if you're not happy with your current school, there's going to be someone, across the way at Texas A&M is probably going to be willing to pay. Jimbo's got deep pockets.
Great.
How do you see the enforcement of this?
The enforcement is a tough one, honestly, and it's one the NCAA struggled with since day one. It's why the NIL has kind of come out the way it has. But I think the compliance officers at the university level would be your first line of defense. You would expand the compliance officer role to also be the NIL guidance counselor, if you will, and they would be the ones that would be working with the new governing body to allow for collectives and allow for the distributions, and there would be a 10% holdback to allow for the administration of that new governing body. What we're not interested in is creating a governing body that's going to be a for-profit, and they're just going to all sit around and make a bunch of money off of the 18 to 23-year-old kids that are playing ball.
Absolutely incredible. What if you sat down at the table and someone said a 5-point plan is amazing, but you only get 4 points? What point would you concede on that you think's least important?
I think the one I would have listed them in order, and I think the negative consequences is that I would probably pull off the table, and that's because the eligibility rule is already in place that you miss a year of eligibility on your second transfer. So that's one I'd pull back. But that's a great question, Brent.
That's good.
Thank you.
That's a good response.
And the portal, so on the portal, we're going to see how much every athlete is making and who is contributing to that?
Yes, sir.
No, that's good.
Yes. Yeah. Transparency is the key. And incentives drive behavior.
Great idea.
And what we want to do is we want to incentivize these young men to graduate from the degree, the program that they began with, but we also want to give them options. So if they come into a program, coaches move, the circumstances change, someone comes in that's big and hot and keeps them from playing, they still have options. Thank you.
Hey, I got my mattress for you too. Dude, I love it.
Awesome. That was unbelievable.
Appreciate it, brother.
Nice work, guys. There's some good options.
I got a book that I read on the way over, Wisdom of the Book. If I can get it, can you sign a copy of it for me?
Absolutely.
All right, thank you, sir.
Well done, Jake. Thank you very much.
They're enthusiastic, aren't they? Enthusiastic.
All right, our last NIL presentation, the UCF Knights. Been a lot of good ideas. A lot of good ideas. It's going to be tough to to come up with something original. So
It's hard to go after the oil man over here. He's tearing it up. All right. I'll start off by saying it's hard to come up with the right answer if you can't acknowledge the problem. Currently in the NCAA, for several years, several generations now, even an old guy like me, we've said we're amateurs, we're not getting paid, but we got scholarship stipends, we are getting paid, just like any other student on campus that's going to a job at McDonald's, Best Buy, the Apple store. We're doing the same thing, but we're doing it on the playing field. We need to acknowledge that players are employees. Once we get past that stigma, we already have a framework that works at the professional levels that can be adapted and modified and applied at the NCAA level to give you the answers to the problems you're facing now. We don't need a patchwork, if you look at this map, of state laws governing. It causes confusion, doesn't allow clarity, and we can't give decisive answers and know where to go, how to act, and have everybody operating together. If you set up a collective bargaining agreement where all of these NCAA athletes actually have a student-athlete association that they become a member of the second they sign a scholarship and remain a member of after they're done with college, as long as they pay their dues each year, they have a voice. The NCAA would be almost like the ownership group, and the individual universities are like the teams. Now they have to come together and negotiate a collective bargaining agreement and set up the contracts in a manner that's going to protect the things that they care about the most. Thank you.
Well, that was an original, that was good, that was different. Gentlemen?
So I was in the NFL. I got a chance to be on the NFLPA and negotiate the collective bargaining agreement between players and ownership. I was on the executive committee. In those decisions, you have to sacrifice things, I'm sure you know.
Correct.
So my question would be, how do you know, or how do the players know what's most important when there are these different geographical issues, maybe decisions that some players do care about and other players don't?
Currently, there's really no way for those players to organize. But just like in any situation where there's a democracy, those players have to gather, they have to organize, and they have to make their voice known. I think the issues that would be addressed is once all the guys in this room or that have played in any other sport, female sports, soccer, basketball, baseball, they've got to get organized and make sure that the things they care about are communicated to the NCAA and the schools to be addressed. And that's the only way those are going to get addressed. Just like, to your point, the players that were, the guys that were respected, that were knowledgeable off the field, that gathered that group of human capital and then got that idea together, said, hey, we need to take care of this. This is not right. They communicated that got answered. Same way in democracy, you got to vote, you got to get your voice out there. I think that's how you address it. It's going to take a lot of time before the student athletes catch up with the schools and the institutions because we're not organized. And most of it is because you're only there for a 3-year window. It's really, once you're out of there, you don't have any reason to come back and buy into that. We can change that if you set up the structure like we're proposing.
In those negotiations, there were lawyers on both sides of the table. The NFL and their ownership had lawyers. The players had lawyers. How do you ensure that the players are protected? You talked about the short runway and the quick turnover compared to these universities that have been established for centuries.
Well, the key is that when you set it up as a collective bargaining agreement and you have the Players Association, all these guys, in order to stay involved in it, we have to pay our dues, and they would vote on who is counsel, who's general counsel that's negotiating for the Players Association. And that group, whether it be one attorney or a group of attorneys that are hired, that's subject to the association voting on that periodically and updating it. And if those attorneys don't do their job, just like anything, get them out, Bob, and let's put somebody else in. And that's all through the players voting in the association. I think once you got that in place, it's going to take a little time to get traction, but that's the quickest way to have an established framework that works in that environment, in sports, and it also has the answer to the question you asked him earlier, how do you get outside of the antitrust? You have an exception for that that's written in the federal statutes that says we're going to allow NCAA sports an exception where they're not subject to antitrust because we think it's that important of a national matter and it's interstate commerce. And I think that's how they address it. I think it's the easiest way. You get a clear answer, clear sense of direction on this early, and it may not be perfect, but it gives us a place to start and really adjust and build on that without doing away with all the good things the NCAA has built up over the last 100, 200 years.
We still got some time. We still got some time.
Which revenues are you talking about that would
I think
be
you
part
can
of
govern
this?
any of the revenues. Now here's the problem. NIL stuff, which is what I'm up here for, let me approach that. You can't really govern independent third parties. So if Jake's oil company wants to pay me, $2 million to go play at A&M, that's great. I don't think they'd ever pay me that, but it would be nice, right? I can't tell the oil company he works for, they can't write me the check. They're not a member of the collective bargaining agreement. However, if Jake's company says, if you transfer away, we're going to pull that money, you can govern the player and penalize the player to prevent that type of contract from happening. So that's the limitation of it. You can't control outside parties' actions, but you can still take action back towards the player or the universities within the rules and framework of the collective bargaining agreement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. It's coming.
It is.
It's coming. Close union. That concludes the NIL portion. We had originally thought we would go in the same order for each topic, but I don't think that's fair. So we're going to mix it up. And as we go to the transfer portal, we're going to start with the Iowa State Cyclones.
All right, good thing I didn't fall on the walk up there. So that's the first win there. How y'all doing today? Good. My name is Jamari Tansmore. I'm representing Lake Forest College, and I can get pretty long-winded. So one thing I ask you to do is I'm gonna tell you when I'm halfway through, and then you can go ahead and start my timer. Is that good? All right, no worries. I'll try to keep it in my 90 seconds as much as I can. So. Our topic is the transfer portal in terms of portal regulation and administration. So if you can see, turn to your expert panel topics under the transfer portal section, you'll see a section called player considerations. And pay attention to the first 5 words. First 5 words says athlete anxiety, uncertainty, and risk. Athlete anxiety, uncertainty, and risk. And I believe that's where the meat and potatoes of our issue lies, and more importantly, I believe the issue resides in the education of the transfer portal in terms of our players. And that too many players transfer blindly, right? Not everyone is fully aware of and fully educated on all the consequences and the ramifications of getting into the transfer portal before they do so. So our solution for that is to have players enter a probationary holding period that is completely confidential to everyone except the head coach, because we believe the head coach should know. And this period could be about 15 or 30 days, but this period will stand so that you will have time before you officially enter your name into the portal to go through a personalized training, e-learning or a certification of courses that affirms that you are fully aware of all your consequences and ramifications of entering the portal before you do so. So there's no blind side. You're fully aware of what's going on. You can't say, I didn't know that this was going to happen when I entered the portal. So basically it's a full disclosure solution, a full awareness solution that you could go into before entering the portal. Did I do good? There you go. All right. I saw him creeping, so I'm like, okay, let me go ahead and try to speed it up a little bit. But go ahead and open up for questions.
Jamari, as quickly as you speak, you were fine. You got everything in. That's very good. So this is essentially like what corporations do with the annual tutorials that their employees have to take in workplace rules and I worked for a big company, and every year you had to recertify that you had done this. You could do it in that sort of way, right? Yeah. Have you thought about how the teaching would go, or what form it would take?
I said personalized training. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up because that gives me a chance to really expand upon that. So
I'm here for you.
So what the personalized training is that, yes, we would give you a grand scheme or grandiose kind of deal of all the information you need to know in terms of the transfer portal. What could happen? What risk are you taking? What might you get into if you enter your name, right? For everyone across the NCAA. However, I'm thinking the interface or the portal that we make would have a section to where you could put where you're transferring from and transferring to, so that the second part of the training is personalized to your situation. Because as we know, the main issue of it is credits, academic credits. We're all accredited by the same accreditation. However, each school has different requirements on, we can only transfer this many credits, 8, 9, 12, or whatever the case is, and these classes count for this. So the main thing that players run into is the issue of academic transfer credits in terms of, oh, I thought I was gonna be a senior on the field, but really I'm gonna be a junior. And I only have 1 year left of eligibility, which means that I have a whole other year of classes to take without being on scholarship for it, which is a way that players can say, I got screwed by the portal. So if this is all lined out basically for you before you enter your name, it basically, first of all, it makes sure you're fully aware and fully educated about your choice to get into the portal. And what it can do is slow you up and kind of make sure you're making a rational decision in terms of leaving the portal, as opposed to just saying, I'm not getting playing time, let's leave. And the other thing it could do, it could also slow up, because another question is, should there be a limit on the number of times one can transfer? If someone's going through this rational process, because they have to actually think about their choice before they're going into it, that might also eliminate the number of times they would transfer as well, knowing that the more times you transfer, the harder it's going to be in terms of actually getting your degree, which is the main thing about being a student athlete. So.
During this probationary period, you said the head coach knows. Does the head coach know where you're planning to transfer to, or just that you're going to enter the transfer portal?
Just that you're looking to enter the transfer portal, because we want to also protect the players in that sense as well, because sometimes they might not even know where they're going to transfer to.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, it's like I might have 2 or 3 schools that I might want to transfer to. However, the confidentiality notice is for the coach to know that you have a certain player who's contemplating leaving, so that now that's all I know. I can get my short list together. I can get my plan together to kind of protect the coach in terms of getting a replacement for that player, if that's what they choose to do. Okay. But as far as that, the confidentiality piece of it is going to be completely airtight in terms of, making sure the player is protected, coach is protected, everyone involved is protected, so that there's no division in the locker room. Oh, he's going to transfer, he's not bought in, which is also brought up as well, talking about how, oh, he's not very much bought in, and if I have a teammate who's thinking of, yeah.
Thank you, Jamar. Thank you. Jordan. Yeah, very good. Yeah.
Good job, Jamar. I love the personalized piece. Good job.
Nicely done. All right. Cyclones set a high bar there. Next up, let's go UCF.
It's a long walk. We are here today to reimagine the transfer portal for the fairness of teams, coaches, and players. So what we suggest is a 2-year period from the time you commit to a school and you show up until you're actually able to transfer. What this means is that you're showing some actual commitment, and it takes away some of the issues with players transferring because they didn't play. There are exceptions to this. We'll call them acts of God, where if a coach there's a coaching change or exceptional family issue, you are allowed to transfer out of that underneath that time period. And we would also cap the amount of transfers to 1 transfer. And the act of God exceptions would not be counted towards that. In order to execute this, we would suggest that there should be a 30-day clarity period, as mentioned before, where for 15 days, both players and coaches are able to actually talk to each other. Right now, that's not legal, but what that is causing is some unfairness, and coaches still doing it and players still doing it, and those who are deciding to abide by the rules are getting screwed over. This also would allow players to be informed and thinking that, oh, I should be able to go to this school because of my playing abilities. When you talk to schools, you can find out what the market actually says, so maybe you will not transfer if you are well informed. And then the last 15 days of that period would be the player actually putting themselves in the portal and the coach therefore knowing that 15 days to actually execute on finding other players. In order to transfer, a player must complete training for what the transfer eligibility rules are and to even enter the portal. And around that, there will be a bunch of other standards and data to make that happen.
Thank you, Terrence. Gentlemen? Anything?
Salt. Had me at hello. Hang on, Sam's got you.
So you talked about that 2-year period is that from when a player commits to a school or from when a player steps on campus? Because we know a lot of coaches are offering quote unquote scholarships, but they're not real offers. They talk about them being committable offers versus non-committable offers. When does that 2-year period begin?
Once you step on campus as a scholarship athlete is when the 2-year period begins.
And then you talked about the one transfer option. If there's another coaching change, I was not on the phone, but I listened to a player who had 4 or 3 different head coaches in the span of 3 or 4 years. He can transfer any time there's a new coach.
I think that would be the reality of the rule. I think that seems like a very big exception to see that many changes in one period of one time of a person's playing career. But certainly that would be the spirit of the rule, is to allow that to occur.
Terrence, that was impressive. I'm sure your team was ideating other things. What was the one thing that almost made it in, but it got cut to the cutting room floor that you'd put in?
The question of should coaches be aware of players transferring is probably the biggest hurdle. And we decided, thankfully, we did have a coach in our group, and she was telling us about the issues from the coach's perspective. And I think because of that, we decided that it is better for the coach to be aware. That's why we want that 30-day period, to prevent there being a penalty on the player for informing the coach. It gives the coach their own incentives for that period to exist.
Great process.
Well done. Did y'all discuss at all what time of year when this would take place?
Yes, we believe it should occur really close to when the season ends, so the teams can reshuffle and you can get back into knowing who you have on your team, and begin the rebuilding process for the next season relatively quickly.
All right. And the whole idea is to ameliorate the issue of guys or athletes going into the portal and not coming out, right?
Right. I think there's like a 60% rate of people who enter the portal and then no longer have scholarships at the end of that process. And what we want to do is maybe a more well-informed player and a more well-informed coach can prevent people from even entering the portal if they knew their statistical chances, which will be part of this. The data we'd be using actually is the last 2 years of transfer portal stats, and we would roll this out for another 2 years, and we take that data and give an individual player their actual statistical chances based off of similar players at a similar position at the same school who tried to transfer and it either went well or didn't well, and what it looks like for you.
Wow.
Good. Can we hear, I know you talked about the coach in your group. From a player perspective, I don't get excited about the idea of the coach knowing about the transfer opportunity because some coaches aren't always well intentioned. What would the coach from your group, or maybe if you would say the benefits for a coach knowing, or even the downside? What's the benefit of the coach knowing?
Yeah, I think the major benefit is just from the coach's perspective. It's really hard to look at your team and put together a team and understand how you're going to address the next season if you can't tell when a player is going to leave, if they want to leave, and if they're doing things in the dark. Our assumption is it's worse for everyone. It's just better for there to be a closed off period where within these 30 days we know these things happen, so that way a coach isn't on edge when is this player, I got a message saying I got a player looking out, like now that player is on the coach's bad side, and that's what we see is currently happening. So what we're saying is, if we bring it out into the light and we put a start and end point on it, maybe we can prevent that and keep the coach-player dynamic a relatively good one.
Thank you. Very good.
Good job, Terrence. That was well structured. I love the data model.
Well done, Richard. Well
Great
done. That was good and good recruiting by UCF to have a coach. Yeah. Well done. Okay, next up, the Gophers.
Oh, they're sending up
two. They each get 45 seconds.
Each, or is it?
Yeah. They got tandem.
That's right.
Sorry. Go Gophers. All right, so as one of, and maybe the only current student athlete here, I feel like I have a unique perspective to talk about the transfer portal, as I think we could all recognize that it has benefits. However, due to the lack of regulations on the amount of transfers and penalties for transferring, there is significant harm done to a student athlete's social, academic, and athletic experience. So as a result, we've come up with the following solution.
So our solution is you get two based off of your academic status. So you'll have one opportunity to transfer as an undergraduate student athlete to use at any time, freshman, sophomore, junior, as long as you have not graduated yet. And we want to limit it to just that one, unless you get a second opportunity if you graduate, because the main purpose of being a student athlete is to graduate with a degree. So once you graduate, you would have an opportunity to transfer a second time. And then we have named a hardship transfer. And that's more of an umbrella term. So in case, let's say I'm from Florida, I committed to Stanford, but I have a family emergency, or my mom, God forbid, something happened to her, I got to get back to the East Coast to be close to her. I have a transfer opportunity to get back to the East Coast. Or if, like I mentioned before, if the coach that recruited me to Stanford has left, I have an opportunity to leave. We want these in place, this policy in place, because number one, as someone mentioned before, the negative impacts on academics, not all credits transfer over, and not all majors are offered all over across the board. And number two, it really hinders the high school recruiting opportunity. And with that said, we want to implement a checks and balances towards the percentage of how much of a recruiting class can be transfer portal versus high school student athletes to keep our coaches accountable and keep it equitable across the board. Any questions?
Yeah, I applaud tying it to the academics. I also love the recognition of a graduation opportunity, which was fantastic. When you got to the hardship principle, how much of a catch-all was it? Did you define, look, these are the 2 or 3, or was it, we'll make it up as we go?
Yeah, so the main parts we wanted to catch with the hardship was majoritively if it really, someone mentioned before, an act of God. So if you had a family emergency, or if you have a health condition that only the East Coast has facilities for.
Yep.
But also we recognize that recruiting, a lot of us are recruited by the coaches and we have a relationship, and if they leave, we might not necessarily want to be at that school anymore.
So those are the two. Huh? Those are the two qualifiers.
Really only two, and those would be a case-by-case basis that the NCAA, the compliance office would regulate.
Got it, thank you.
So statistically, it takes most students about 6 years to get through college today. So if you look at when they're going to graduate, how much eligible time would you have left? And does it make sense? I mean, again, I applaud you tying the second transfer to the graduation. But in reality, how much time would be left on your eligibility if a student wanted to transfer a second time with the amount of eligibility versus the time it takes to graduate?
I believe that's what the first transfer addresses, because if you want to transfer in your undergraduate, you have that opportunity. Right. And if for whatever reason a second opportunity comes up, it would be your second time transferring. So you have to, go through the process of being a graduate student or having a hardship. We kind of set a hard line on that because we want to reduce the amount of times that a player enters transfer portal.
And if I could just add on to that, with all due respect, most student athletes graduate early. They don't need 6 years. That's usually just regular students. Right. But in the unusual case that does happen, like you said.
Yeah. I know we're talking about the downsides of the transfer portal. I think about some players like a guy like Jamison Williams transfers Ohio State to Alabama, first round pick. Like, what are the positives, even from a student athlete perspective, of the transfer portal, and should the limitations that we're putting, would those outweigh those positives?
I believe that the transfer portal is primarily if you're having a negative experience at the school you're at, for whatever reason that might be, whether that's academics, with your coach, with your teammates, mental health reasons. So I believe that by providing that one chance to enter the transfer portal without a precondition, then that really gives you the opportunity to do that. And then, again, if for whatever reason, some sort of hardship, or you become a graduate student, you can enter the second time. But again, by allowing that one transfer, I believe that addresses, like in your case, Jamison Williams, being able to do that.
Tying in the education is a big deal, guys, so that's really well thought.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, not at all.
Good job. I'm glad to hear your voice.
And actually, I appreciate you. Thank you, Gophers. The Georgia Bulldogs. Give us our last portal presentation.
Thank you for this opportunity. As a former student at Harvard University and grad transfer to University of North Carolina, I'm very familiar with this topic. And so our group, we wanted to create the transfer portal more academic based and more accountable. And so our game plan was to allow students to transfer within the first 2 to 4 semesters if they're having a spot where they're uncomfortable academically or they're found that the university is not the right fit for them, they could transfer. We also wanted to enlist a GPA requirement that if students outside of those first 2 to 4 semesters want to transfer, they have to be at a certain GPA level in order to transfer to a different school. And as well, if a student graduates and earns their degree, allow them to transfer too. We also want this transfer to happen after the season to allow people and teams to know where their team roster stands throughout the season, as well as plan for the next season. We would also want a period of time during this time period that any of the colleges and students can communicate with each other, and if they violate that time period, there would be accountable measures from the NCAA, both on the coaches and or the players who violate these time period. So that could be a loss of suspension but for coaches, suspension for players, and possible fines for the university if people communicate outside of these time frames about the transfer portal.
Spencer, that's intriguing. Just to be, so I'm clear, the GPA requirement only is necessary from the 5th semester on, or?
Correct.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it still allows people to transfer, but they have to reach a certain academic capability, because one of the issues that we wanted to talk about and address was people that are transferring but won't be able to graduate and have those academic problems. And so we wanted to instill those rules to keep that academic ability capable.
Spencer, these are all really intriguing. One of the things that comes up, though, having been a conference commissioner and all of that, is just the enforcement of all of these pieces. And I know that's an open-ended question, but there's a lot of things there that would need some enforcement, some way to make sure that everybody's on an even playing field. So grade point average would be one that could be really interesting. We see that now, so.
Spencer, I love the fact you have firsthand experience having gone through this yourself, and I also love you tied it to the GPA and graduation. On the first 2 to 4 semester, the question I have, did you all think about what would be the criteria for a receiving institution who may be taking a student who may be struggling academically, and then they have the risk of whether or not that student would remain qualified to play? Did you think through that? Is there sort of a floor?
We thought about that measurement more in terms of if the student didn't feel that the university they commit to was the right fit for them.
Okay.
So we didn't think through the aspect if they were failing certain classes. I think that could be added on to the back. Like if they're failing a class, then there would be some type of academic intervention at that current university. But our intent was more towards if they saw a university that they committed to and during the recruiting process they found that it wasn't what was sold to them, they have that capability to find someplace else and find a spot where they can academically go as well as go as a player to find a more suitable location.
And I would also think if your GPA is not sufficient, the next school wouldn't let you in. Anyway.
Yeah, that was the question.
You'd like to think that.
I was thinking the student, would they be in peril if they say, I'm struggling here academically, and they put themselves in the portal and no one takes them because they're saying, I run the risk of having a student that's not qualified to play. So I didn't know if there was a floor in there.
No.
Yeah, that's the question I was going to drive to is, do you have to have say a 2.0 GPA before you can even enter the portal?
If you're in that time period after that 2 to 4 initial years of stepping onto campus, yes.
So in the first couple of semesters, irrespective of what your GPA is, you can still transfer if you think the university is not a good fit.
Correct.
All right.
And then after that, having those first 2 years, you have to establish yourself as a reputable student that has those academic grades, which supports you in earning your degree, but also shows the next university that you'll support the university's pursuit academically.
What was the discussion of going between 2 and 4 semesters? How did y'all? How come you couldn't make a decision?
Because we're looking at more so like when universities require students to declare a major, and so depending on that university, it could be a year or a year and a half or 2 years.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Good idea.
Good job. Appreciate it.
Great job, Spencer. Thank you. Thank you.
That's interesting. All right. So pour all that out of your brains and let's move to employer-employee.
This is going to be an interesting one.
And the third rail of intercollegiate athletics. This time, going first will be UCF. Get the long walk out of the way first this time.
So, thanks for your leadership, Joey, and to my team. So, when I played, I played for 5 years, took 4 years to graduate. My 5th year, I dropped my football scholarship and picked up a university research assistant position because it was so much more lucrative. I went from having to wash laundry in the sink to actually live like most of the students who worked for the university. So the NCAA's historical approach to scholarships is a long history, and it's helped countless student athletes, including myself. And all these, all the NIL and the transfer portal that we've been hearing about provides even more opportunity. But these approaches risk not being equitable across sports and across genders, and potentially harming those in the university who are most at risk and are most in need of support. So therefore, an approach is needed that provides a living wage in addition to the scholarships and books across all athletes that protect the most vulnerable. And I think we'll agree that this is a primary mission of universities, should be a primary mission of athletic departments. So athletes of employees of the university provides an existing mechanism to facilitate this end state, and the spirit of design thinking provides a great prototype. Funding, of course, will be an issue. But we've heard lots of good ideas in the NIL briefs about different ways this might be tackled. Out of respect, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So are athletes employees or not?
Sorry, yeah, well, that's what it's going to be. It's getting there. Yes. So athletes as employees of the university.
So can they be fired?
So these are great questions. So there's questions about, hold on. There's questions about funding. There's questions about tax. There's questions about whether or not they can be filed, what kind of protections that you have. That all need to be worked out. My personal view, of course, they can't be fired. And you can write that in, I mean, for heaven's sakes, you're at a university, you have a tenured employee, a tenured professor, they can get away with all kinds of malfeasance and not get fired. So there's plenty of precedents for that.
So then if you're an employee and you can't get fired, what's the, I think I'm missing something. Explain to me what the penalty is for an athlete who's an employee.
I see. I didn't see where you're taking that question. Yes, of course. So you would need to have some sort of mechanism in place that's a lot like what we have now for the way scholarships are handled. So however university, different views on this, but however university chooses to handle the way they manage their scholarships, you would manage it in the exact same way. It's not trying to skirt issues like that. And I think by being an employee of the university, it's one of the nice things about it is it enables a lot of current mechanisms to be left in place because there's already an understanding of those mechanisms and there's already a way of doing business and there's already relationships between the entities that are involved.
What's the payment structure for these employees that are, you said the athletes are employees, how do they get paid?
Yeah, so I think they should get, how much?
What's the structure for their
So
payment?
the structure, I think, it would be a lot like the way they handle other student employees at the university. So for example, research assistantships, I think are a really nice model for that because that's somebody they're kind of a professional. You're doing research for the university, you're getting funded by the university, and you pay the tax and you pay the, you're just an employee. So via that mechanism, and each university has already actually already has mechanisms by which those salaries are set. So just because I'm doing an assistant in one department doesn't necessarily mean I'm getting paid more in another department.
Did you think about equity, not only between institutions, but between sports and an institution?
Yeah. So I think, we did, that was something that we discussed. More ideation is needed on that. My personal view is that, as a football player is just as valuable to the fabric of an institution, of a university, as the volleyball player or the softball player or any of the intercollegiate athletes. So my personal view is that whatever that living wage is, whatever that stipend is, it's goes across the board. And yes, we realize that you've got to be thoughtful about how you implement that so that you don't put at risk losing sports.
Yes.
Jim, one of the things that comes up is if your employees would they be allowed to unionize? Could they form unions?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, I guess by definition they'd have to be able to allow. Yeah.
There's a downside to that.
There is a downside to that.
Yeah, right.
Yep. There's a downside to the way we're doing it right now too.
So, but do you not see this as a bit of a slippery slope? Because what if you're on the University of Texas band?
Yeah.
And you say, hey, the band's pretty important for halftime, and so why aren't we getting paid as university employees?
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. I mean, I'm thinking, I think of it in context of the NCAA. Okay. Right. So if the band is covered by the NCAA, then yeah, they should be part of it as well. But insofar as they're not, then no. Yep. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Georgia? Excuse me, you're up.
So we evaluated this through the three primary stakeholders. So the first was the universities. No, we do not want athletes to be employees. There's no incentive for the universities to have student athletes as employees. Too much legal obligations, too many lawsuits, too many malpractice, all that stuff. So no there. For athletes, definitely not. You can get fired. So that's the biggest thing. We want to protect the student athlete from a scholarship standpoint. They can get an education. And then lastly, the buyers. So we do not want student athletes to be employees because there's a certain pageantry associated with college football. The reason college football makes so much money is because it's not professional football. So if you have the pageantry of college football, the reason that it's not like minor league baseball or something like that is because the very nature that they're student athletes. So the reason college football is so great is because they're not employees. And then the last thing we talked about is interstate commerce. So what do you do with taxes if you have an athlete that plays one game in North Carolina and New York? How do you tax that? The last thing you want to be thinking about as an athlete when you come back from a game on Sunday is, hey, how do I pay my taxes for this week? Obviously, that's not something that you want on the athlete's mind. And then lastly, what would probably happen if you had student athletes as employees is roster cuts. And so right now it's somewhere around 120 football players on a team. What you'll probably see end up happening is an NFL scenario where you have 50, 55 players on a team because of the nature of paying players, what you'd have to do from a salary cap standpoint and all that. So, end of story. No, student athletes should not be employees.
Well, I didn't see anybody going there. That's interesting. How do you? Just telling them no, you think is sufficient? You can't do it?
Yes, and we kind of talked about this. So obviously we say no, student athletes shouldn't be employees, but what do you do? So we have the NIL now, which more or less puts the athlete in the category of being their own entity. So you have an athlete that can make money, but it's not from the school as an employee, it's from extra organizations. We kind of kicked around the idea of maybe creating like a third party, Stanford University Athletics Incorporated that would be affiliated with the school, but they would not be the ones like the school would paying a student athlete like they would a professor or an employee of the school. So yes, what is the solution? It's not to make them employees, but it's some sort of way in which we work the NIL to create an entity for the student where they could be a 1099 contractor and getting paid through these various organizations. And also with that, you have, different tiers. Obviously you have like the top 1% guys that will generate a lot of the money, but that's not what's going to be the case for most athletes, even at Division I colleges. So you want to kind of separate that, and yes, you'll have this structure that arises to take care of the top 1% of revenue generators, but for the rest of the athletes there, you still want to protect this institution of college sports where they have a scholarship, and at the end of the day, they have something to show for it when they leave the school going forth in their life, as opposed to just being an employee somewhere where maybe they got fired and then maybe they didn't get a degree. A question we asked is, if a student athlete is an employee, does that mean they have to go to class? Because a janitor that works at the school, they don't go to class, but they still work for the school. So, at the end of the day, I think it's better for college sports as a whole, not only from a revenue generation standpoint, but also from a image standpoint and what it means to the culture to have the institution of a student athlete, because that protects what makes college sports great and separates it from your XFL or your minor league farm teams in baseball or your second tier NBA, whatever there is, and that's what makes it great. One thing we talked about as a group is no other country has this institution of college football where I went to my school and I have the loyalty to my school. Even if I wasn't an athlete there, people have loyalty to their school, and that's what eventually, like down the road, generates all the revenue for college sports, is because Americans are loyal to the school they went to, and it's kind of like this sacred, set-apart thing from pro sports that you don't see really at any other place in the world. So, it's kind of philosophical, but at the same time, it goes back to, if we transition into treating student athletes like employees, then you're going to have a case where you're kind of degrading the institution that for the last century plus has been something that's like venerated in American culture. So,
hey Hunter, I celebrate that you empathize with all three stakeholders. You fell in love with the problem, not an idea. So you really went counter to what I think I was expecting, which was great. The second is I love the fact you had an alternative, which is the NIL discussion earlier. So it's not just a no, it's a yes and. Yeah, we believe we should treat the student athlete differently, and here's a different way to do it. And the third is if you lose and it does go through, TurboTax could help with those taxes.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone. So
just had to put it in.
Well, no, Hunter, you hit the secret of college sports is at the end we all root for laundry, right? Yeah, it's whatever color you're supposed to be wearing, and I think that's I hope that doesn't get lost in all this tumult.
Well, yeah, it's that too. Plus, you think about it from the revenue generation standpoint. You obviously have the sacred nature of the college sport, but then does it make college sports great that student athletes aren't employees? And that's what actually makes it such a big business and something that in our culture has so much pull and gravitas. So that's good.
Nicely done. Nicely done. Okay, next up, the Cyclones.
Hello, I'm Drew from University of Tulsa representing, I guess I'm a transfer over to Iowa State today. So, all right, getting right to it. I'm just going to say a few words. Think about them as I say them. Parity, exclusion, longevity, sustainability, and amateurism. So we are in the same camp. We're against athletes as employees. Why? We're not starting from scratch. So we're not the Apple store with 4 computers doing this great new thing. We have a big mess. And so we want to have something that can solve the problem that may be out there. And we don't believe this is it. So the main reason is there are 2 main reasons there, legal and financial. So we don't think that this is sustainable financially. And we think that this is just going to get stuck in the courts for years and years and years and years. So there's a multitude of laws across all the various states, both public and private institutions, that would have to figure out their individual rules. So that doesn't sound like parity anymore. It sounds like individualism. Also doesn't sound like amateurism anymore, which used to be one of the main tenets of the NCAA. So those are really the main reasons, but you can go a lot lower with salary cap. Are you part of pension? How long are you in the healthcare plan? How do we remove you from the healthcare plan? What are the contingent liabilities that are out there forever with workers' comp, et cetera? I yield my time.
That's a British Parliament move, isn't it? Is that fair to just say you can't? I mean, I keep thinking we all kind of agree that we don't like the employee model, but it's percolating for a reason. Is it fair?
Yeah, I don't let my children use the word fair because I don't think fair exists, right? So I think that someone's going to have to get the short end of a stick in all cases. We can't all be at the top because then that wouldn't be the top anymore. So there is no such thing as fair, so I don't mean to put you in the class with my children. But that's my answer to anybody that says is anything ever fair. Fair doesn't exist. So I think fair is a farce. So our answer is the NIL. And the gentleman from Arizona has a 5-point plan that we believe in. And so but we obviously agree that there's a problem. We obviously agree that there's a problem. I think this particular path of trying to figure out how to make hundreds of institutions in college football from the top to the bottom in size, we'll just get stuck in courts. And I think if we go back to the top and the words I started with amateurism and parity, I don't think you get that in this scenario. That's the answer. We think NIL is better with a 5-point plan.
You talked about amateurism and parity. Do we have that now even with the NIL?
So I think we have a hybrid amateurism model now that's been chipped away at over time. And so we talked about it last year as a pillar. And the pillar kind of got pushed over with NIL, but there's still some piece of amateurism there. Not specifically being an employee, I think is specifically outside of employment, which in my opinion might be still amateur. But adding the NIL, I think that's obviously we're all debating it, and we're going to be debating it for years. The NIL goes one step to try to help solve some of that problem of, well, I don't think we have the problem defined really well yet with what the NIL is actually solving, right? So are we trying to solve equity, or are we trying to solve that they're taking my image from my jersey sales and not giving it to me? So I also think that that's gotten lost in a lot of this conversation. So I don't know how to define that in the answer to you, but I think that so I don't know. Maybe I'm not ramble and just stop there.
Well, the Olympics dumped amateurism 30, 40 years ago and they're better than ever. Why is amateurism important?
I mean, I just think it's part of the institution. I think it's part of the fabric of the laundry, like you spoke of in the last presentation. And I think that the consumer of the sport, the fans, I think they still like the idea that these are just my classmates that are out there playing with me. We know that it's slightly different than that now. It's always been different. I think the amateurism is part of what the consumer likes, is the answer.
One more question for me before we go. Last year, or a year and some change ago, before NIL really took place, there was a lot of fear going on. People were saying, this is going to change the way I consume football. These guys are going to be paid athletes, and it's not going to be the same. Yet ratings were higher than they've ever been, even with NIL and players getting millions of dollars, some getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, yet the game is still growing. What is the problem if ratings are still high?
I'm going to answer from a mid-major. So I went to the University of Tulsa, and so I think a program like Tulsa and fans of a program like Tulsa or Tulane would say, all right, we're a small institution. We don't have the ability to compete long-term, and one of the words I used was sustainability. The financial sustainability model here it's just not sustainable. You do have an unlimited amount of financial support from big donors at big schools, but not all schools. And so I think the parity and sustainability is a sort of a pendulum that is really hard to manage. So I think short term, we're under the same model we were under. I don't think that we know what NIL is really going to do. I think it's too early. I think that we've talked about capping, rookie salaries, freshman guys. That is probably part of a solution, but I don't think we've seen, I think you got to see it for 5, 6, 7 years. I do think it is going to change, my opinion. I think it's going to change the landscape. I think we're going to completely demolish what we love today. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Drew. Thanks. That's good. Good job. Thank you.
Good job, Drew. There's another mid-major, I agree with you.
Great job. Great job. Thanks. Thank you, Drew. All right, we started with the Minnesota Gophers, and so we will conclude with the Minnesota Gophers.
Jason Grady. I'm representing South Dakota. It is a state up there, I promise. I believe SDSU just won. But today I'm a Gopher. So the problem we're here to address today is whether or not athletes are employees. Are they athletes? Are they scholars? Should athletes be listed as employees? No. That's it. No. But there's reasons why, and I'm excited to discuss it. But constituents that are affected by this are almost entirely negative. But players, school, parents, non-athletes, the schools themselves, the sponsors, the communities, different employees at the school, almost everything, if we go through this cons list here, has a negative impact on them, right? And more importantly, the biggest conflict of interest is the academic commitment that we made as individuals to go to a school. So as an alternative, we propose some sort of 1099 at the most, where each individual in their own right can build their own business, can become their own separate entity. There's been a lot of ideas discussed today on how that might look. But as far as being an employee, no. So, a couple of things that'd be important, I think, to what that contract would look like, we'll talk about.
So South Dakota, West Virginia is also a state, so I'm delighted we got somebody else that has to point that out. So what was the thing you wanted to talk about that we just had to cut you off at time?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's been discussed, but some sort of contract terms, right? A good example that we talked about in our group was length of time type of term, right? If you commit to a school for a year, and if you were taking some sort of money or agreement, had some agreement like that in a contract, and then you decide to transfer or take advantage of any of the things we talked about today, there has to be recourse because it's not fair to the school. The player can take advantage of things like that. So that contract also has to state fair and equitable terms for all parties. That way you're not, damaging the school or the parent or any of these other folks, but at the same time, you make an equal playing field for the smaller sports, the ones that don't generate as much income versus a football program at a large D1 school or something like that.
Got it. Thank you.
Jason, this 1099 idea you threw out, is this a more streamlined structure of NIL? Is that what you're after? Or how does it differ from what kids have going on now?
Sure. So I'm not here to talk about NIL,
yeah.
but yes, yeah, I would say that it helps put a lot of structure to a lot of the questions we still have about NIL and putting it into, again, the opportunity that we all have as individuals, that many of us have built our own businesses, built our own brands and things like that, and that's really the only way on paper to do so and bring structure to the big question mark that's NIL right now.
What would you say to the student athletes that aren't revenue generating? How do you protect them? Are they all 1099 as well? Does NIL help answer those questions?
Well, I think that's where you have that freedom of choice. I honestly, I didn't go into sports to look at a professional career. That was my choice as an athlete. I wasn't looking for dollars other than to get my school paid for. Right, so when you're I'm at a smaller school that'll probably never see an NIL deal, right? But I have that choice as athletes. We have that choice no matter what sport we, participate in. If you feel like you can drum up your own business, I guess I'll stick with what I've been talking about. If you can create a deal for yourself, that gives you the option to put yourself in that 1099 category. Versus what we talked about earlier with, NIL having a minimum threshold if it's spread out across the group. Now you're limiting those types of players. So this gives more flexibility there.
I like your first answer. Thank you, Jason. That was good. Thank you.
Nice job, Jason.
Stay south the pole. Well done, man.
So just know.
I need a round of applause for Nico, who had the toughest job today. And special thanks to the panel here who really spent their time and were thoughtful and helpful, challenged.